Picture this, a freezing December morning, a dusty auction yard, and a woman standing on a wooden stage with her hands tied and a burlap sack over her head, sold like she's nothing. The crowd is laughing. The bids are cruel. And then from the edge of the shadows, one man steps forward and offers $2 silver. But here's the twist. He doesn't buy her to own her. He buys her to set her free. What he doesn't know is that her voice has haunted his life for 3 years, because she once saved him in a cave when he was dying, singing him back from the edge of death. Now she's the one running for her life, branded by abuse, hunted by men with guns and carrying a secret that could destroy her, or finally set her free. So the question is, can two broken people outrun a town's cruelty and fight back hard enough to win their future? Stay with me, because what happens next turns that $2 into the most expensive price anyone ever paid for justice. Lesson. Your past may scar you, but it never gets to decide your worth or your ending. If you felt this story, drop a comment with what part hit you the hardest, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more powerful stories that stay with you. The auction yard in Pine Ridge was a miserable place, filled with desperate men and the smell of cheap whiskey. The December air bit hard, but the men huddled around the wooden stage did not seem to feel it. All eyes were fixed on the woman. Her hands were tied, and her head was completely hidden under a filthy burlap sack. Her gray dress was torn, hanging loose on a frame that had seen too much hardship. She stood perfectly still, like an animal that had learned fighting was pointless. The auctioneer's voice boomed. "What am I bid for this one? She is young and healthy, good for chores." He paused with a nasty grin. "And other duties." A low, ugly laugh rolled through the crowd. Someone shouted that they could not see her face. The auctioneer shot back, "That is the point. Could be a beauty, could be ugly as a stump. You are buying a surprise." The bids were a joke. 50 cents, $1. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Ezra Hawthorne pulled his hat down low. He had ridden into town for flour and salt, not to watch a human being be degraded. He should have just turned and walked away. But he could not. He saw the tiny, uncontrollable tremor in her bound hands. A man yelled, $2, but only if she knows how to cook." The auctioneer tried to push the price higher, but the novelty was wearing off. The crowd was getting bored. "All right then," the auctioneer sighed, losing his patience. $2 going once, $2 going twice." A calm, clear voice cut through the silence. $2. Every head turned. Ezra Hawthorne stepped forward from the shadows. He did not know what made him speak up. He just knew he could not stay silent. He walked to the front and held up $2 so they caught the dim light. Seeing the look in Ezra's eyes, the auctioneer did not argue. "Sold," he snapped, "to the man in black." Crude jokes and laughter followed Ezra, but he paid them no mind. He climbed the wooden steps, and up close he could see the raw, bruised skin on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her. The rough sack over her head looked like it was suffocating her. When he reached to untie her hands, she flinched away from him. "Easy now," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "I am not going to hurt you." He slowly worked the knot free. The auctioneer stepped up beside them. "We need her name for the record." He leaned toward the woman. "Your name, girl." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the falling snow. Then a soft, raspy whisper came from under the sack. "Abigail. Abigail Rose Mercer." In that instant, Ezra's heart stopped beating. He knew that voice. He had heard it 3 years before in a dark cave deep in the mountains. He was bleeding out from a bad wound, freezing to death and ready to give up. A woman had found him. She had saved him. Through 3 long nights, she had sung to him, her voice the only thing that kept him anchored to life. He never saw her face in the darkness, and when he finally woke up, she was gone. He had searched for her for months until he finally convinced himself she had just been a fever dream, an angel his dying mind had created. But he was wrong. She was real. "Sir?" The auctioneer was staring at him. "Are you all right?" Ezra shook his head, clearing his thoughts. We are done here. He gently took Abigail's arm and led her down the steps, away from the gawking crowd. His mind was a storm of questions. How did the woman who saved his life end up on an auction block? "Where are you taking me?" she whispered from under the hood. "Somewhere safe," he promised. "There is no such place." "There is now," he said. At his wagon, he helped her climb into the back. "It is about an hour's ride to my cabin. You can take that thing off your head now if you want." She did not move. As the wagon rolled into the quiet of the snow-covered forest, Ezra's mind kept racing. Why would she not take off the sack? After 20 minutes of silence, he heard a rustle. "You can ask," she said, her voice still a whisper. "I know you want to." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I do not ask questions folks are not ready to answer. Everyone asks questions." "I am not everyone," he replied. A moment passed. "Then why did you buy me?" The question hung in the cold air. Ezra thought for a moment before giving the honest answer. "I do not know," he said. "I just could not stand there and watch. You did not even see my face. I did not need to." "A person is more than just their face," he added quietly. After another long silence, she spoke. "You are different." They reached his cabin as the light began to fade. It was a small, sturdy place with smoke curling from the stone chimney. He helped her down from the wagon. "This is it," he said. "It is not much, but it is warm, and it is safe." She stood very still, a dark shape in the falling snow. "Why are you doing this? Why are you being kind?" Her voice was laced with suspicion. "You do not know me." He gently guided her toward the warmth of the door. "I know all I need to know for now." The cabin was just a room with a narrow bed, a small table, and a couple of chairs. It was clear the man living there had given up on comfort a long time ago. Ezra pointed to a chair near the fire. He said, "There's food in the pot and water in the bucket. You can sit or walk around. It is your choice." But Abigail did not move. She pressed herself against the far wall, trying to fade into the wood. Ezra's heart hurt watching her. She was scared to death of him, so he made her a promise, keeping his voice low and steady. "I have a rule here. I do not touch unless you ask. That door stays open. If you want me to leave, I will go. Do you understand?" She was silent. "I am not going to hurt you, Abigail. I know you have no reason to believe me, but it is the truth." He turned his back to her and went to the stove. He filled a bowl with soup and put it on the table, then moved away to give her space. After a few quiet minutes, he heard her soft footsteps and the scrape of the bowl. He did not turn around. "I always make enough food for two," Ezra said into the quiet. "Started that when my wife was alive, just kept on after she passed. A habit, I reckon." The sound of her eating stopped. Her voice was muffled by the sack. "Your wife?" "His was named Martha. She passed on 5 years ago trying to give birth. The baby did not make it either." "I am sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago," she whispered. "That does not make it hurt any less." Ezra felt his own throat get tight. "No, I reckon it does not." After more silence, she asked, "Why do you keep looking at me that way?" Ezra turned, surprised by her question. "Looking at you how?" she said, "like you are trying to see through this sack, trying to place something." He knew he should probably lie, but instead, he told her the plain truth. 3 years back, I got hurt bad up in the mountains. I should have died. A woman found me and pulled me into a cave. She kept me alive for 3 whole days. The memory was still so clear. I never did see her face. It was too dark, and I was too out of my head. But I heard her voice. She sang to me through the night. It was the same song over and over. I never forgot it. Abigail went completely still. "When you said your name at that auction, I just thought—" He shook his head. "It is a fool's hope. There must be 100 women with a voice like that." She whispered, "What song was it?" And so, quietly, Ezra started to hum a simple, sweet, and mournful tune. The bowl crashed to the floor. Abigail's hand shot up to the burlap sack, her knuckles turning white. "Stop!" she cried out. "Please, just stop!" In the dead silence that followed, Abigail whispered, "It was you, in that cave, the man who was bleeding so much." Ezra's heart hammered in his chest. "You remember?" "I remember all of it," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought you had died. I left to get help, but I thought I was too late." He asked, "Why did you leave?" "My father," she explained, the words catching in her throat. "He was a hard man. He would have finished you if he found you. So I tricked him, then came back the next day, but you were already gone. I woke up all alone. I looked for you for months," he told her. "I looked too, but my father—" She trailed off. "Things got bad. I could not get away." Ezra stood and took a slow step toward her, careful not to scare her. "Abigail, whatever has happened since then, you are safe now, you hear me? You are safe." He could hear her crying softly under the rough fabric. "I killed a man," she whispered. Ezra froze. "He attacked me." Her voice broke apart. "For 2 years he did terrible things. One night he came at me with a knife. I got it away from him and I—" She could not say the rest. "It was self-defense," Ezra said quietly. "His family did not see it that way. They put a price on my head and called me a killer. I have been running for 6 months. They caught me last week and brought me here, where no one would know me or care about a woman in a sack." Ezra felt something deep inside him stir. It was the same feeling that made him bid on her, though he had not understood it then. "They were wrong," he said, "about no one caring." He slowly reached out his hand and touched the edge of the burlap. "Can I take this off?" She trembled but did not pull away. "There is a scar," she whispered, "on my face. From him." "I do not care about scars. Everyone cares about scars." His voice was gentle but firm. "Well, I do not care about what everyone else thinks. I care about you. I have been searching for you for 3 years, Abigail. I started to think you were just a fever dream, and now you are here. I do not give a damn about scars or bounties. You saved my life. Now you have to let me save yours." There was a long silence. Then she gave a slow nod. Ezra carefully untied the knot. The burlap fell away. For the first time, he saw her face. She was beautiful, but not in a delicate way. It was a real fierce kind of beauty. She had tangled auburn hair and green eyes that were full of tears and fear, but also a little bit of hope. And there was the scar, a jagged line from her temple to her cheekbone, that told a story of survival. Ezra just looked at her, feeling his heart break wide open. "There you are," he said softly. "I have been waiting on you." Abigail stared back, tears rolling down her scarred cheek. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you sang to a dying man for 3 nights. I know you risked it all for a stranger. And I know you are still standing after everything you have been through." He gently touched her face, and she did not pull away. "That is enough for me," Ezra said. "We will figure out the rest of it together." That first week was the hardest. Abigail slept in his bed while Ezra took the floor by the fire. She woke up screaming every night, and every night he was right there. He would not touch her, but he would just say her name until she remembered where she was. "I am sorry," she whispered one night, her voice hoarse. Nothing to be sorry for. But I keep waking you. I was not sleeping much anyway, he admitted. In the firelight, she could see his shadow on the wall. Ezra? Yeah? Why can't you sleep? After a long pause, he said, Same reason as you, I reckon. Some dreams just will not stay buried. She wanted to ask him more, but she was not ready to talk about her own demons, so she did not ask about his. Good night, she said. Good night, Abigail. Lying there in the dark, she felt something new. She felt safe. It was a start. Their days found a simple rhythm. He would check his traps while she stayed at the cabin. She learned how to bank the fire and where everything was kept. She started to cook for them. Ezra ate everything she made with a quiet thanks, and always washed the dishes himself. You do not have to do that, she told him one evening. Neither do you, he replied, but here we are. That is different. You bought me. I should be— Stop! His voice was so sharp it made her jump. He saw her reaction and his face softened. Sorry, I did not mean to snap. But you need to understand. I did not buy you, Abigail. I bought your freedom. There is a big difference. He dried his hands on his pants. You are not my property. You are not my servant. You are just a woman who needed some help, and I was able to give it. That is all. That is not how the world works, she said. That might be so, but this is my way. He looked her right in the eyes, and she saw a fire burning in them. You can walk out that door whenever you please. I will not stop you or chase after you. I will not even ask why. But where would I go? That is for you to figure out. The choice is all yours. From this moment on, everything that happens here is because you choose it. Abigail studied him, looking for the trick, the hidden trap she knew had to be there. But she found nothing. You are a strange man, Ezra Hawthorne. I have been told that before. She had not meant it as an insult. He did not take it as one. A quiet understanding passed between them. It was not romance, but something more vital. It was trust. On the 10th day, she finally asked him about Martha. Tell me about your wife. Ezra's spoon froze halfway to his lips. He slowly set it down. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. She paused. You do not have to answer. I know it is not my place. It is fine, he said, pushing his bowl away. His appetite was gone. Martha was— she was sunlight. That is the only way to describe her. She was bright and warm and good, and she made me want to be a better man. We met back in Pennsylvania, growing up on neighboring properties. We married when we were barely 20. A faint smile touched his face. I figured we had forever to fill a house with kids and grow old. But what happened? The smile faded. After 5 years of trying, she was finally pregnant. We were so happy. His voice turned empty and distant. The birth went wrong. The baby came too soon. Martha started bleeding, and the doctor could not stop it. I held her hand as she passed, and then I held my son until he took his last breath. I buried them both on a hill overlooking our valley. His eyes looked hollowed out by sorrow. After that, I just could not stay. Everything there reminded me of what I had lost. So I headed west, figuring I would find a different way to die out here. But you did not die. No. I found this place. I built this cabin and just kept breathing, even when I did not want to. He paused. Then I found you. And for the first time in years, I thought maybe there was a reason I was still here. Tears slid down Abigail's face. I am so sorry, she whispered. So sorry for what you went through. Do not be sorry. Just be here, he said, reaching across the table. That is more than enough. She placed her hand on his. His skin was rough and calloused, but it was warm and real. The second week was when the danger found them. Ezra returned from town with a haunted look in his eyes. What is wrong? Abigail asked immediately. He moved through the cabin like a caged animal, checking the windows, testing the door, making sure his rifle was loaded and close. Ezra, you have to talk to me. He finally stopped and faced her. There is a man in town asking questions. Abigail's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? About a woman with auburn hair and a scar on her face, sold 2 weeks ago. Who is he? A bounty hunter. Name is Silas Thorne. The name was new to her, but she knew his type. He is looking for me. Looks that way. Garrett's father must have sent him. Garrett. She had not been able to speak his name before. Garrett Stone. The man I killed. Her voice trembled, but she pushed on. His father is Virgil Stone, a rich and powerful man who does not let things go. What did Garrett do to you? The question filled the small cabin. Abigail hugged herself, suddenly feeling a deep chill. My father owed him money from gambling. When he could not pay, he sold me to him instead. She gave a bitter laugh. Sold me for $200. My own father? He was more of a jailer than a father. Her legs felt weak. Garrett was a monster, Ezra. The things he did. You do not have to tell me. No, I want to. I need you to know. She took a deep breath. For 2 years, I was his property. He hurt me in every way a person can be hurt. When I fought back, he just hurt me more. She touched the scar on her cheek. He gave me this the first time I tried to run. He said it would mark me as damaged goods, so no one else would ever want me. Ezra's jaw was set so tight she could hear his teeth grind. How did you get away? One night he came home, drunker than usual, waving a knife. He said he was going to cut me up so I could never have children, so I would be useless to anyone but him. Her tears fell, but her voice was steady. I fought him. He dropped the knife, and I picked it up. She closed her eyes, seeing it again. There was so much blood. You did what you had to do to survive. I killed him. You saved yourself. His family and the law will not see it that way. Ezra knelt beside her and took her hands. To hell with his family and to hell with the law. They put a $500 bounty on my head. I do not care if it is 5,000. Let every bounty hunter west of the Mississippi come. His eyes burned with a fierce promise. They are not taking you. Not as long as I am breathing. You would risk your life for me? You already risked yours for me back in that cave. That was different. How, she asked, but she had no answer. He squeezed her hands. We are in this together now. Whatever is coming, we face it together. Do you understand? She could only nod. Good. Now help me barricade the windows. The bounty hunter arrived 3 days later. Abigail heard the slow, deliberate sound of a horse approaching. It was the sound of a man who was not in a hurry, certain his prey was cornered. Ezra, I hear a horse. He was already grabbing his rifle. Get away from the windows and do not make a sound. Should I hide? No, he said, his voice like iron. No more hiding. We face this together. The horse stopped, right outside. A voice, smooth as silk, called out, Ezra Hawthorne. I know you are in there, and I know you have something that does not belong to you. Ezra moved to the door. State your business. The name is Silas Thorne. I'm looking for a woman. Abigail Mercer. Heard you bought her a couple of weeks back. You heard wrong. Did I? The man chuckled. A cold sound. See, I have been on this woman's trail for 6 months. She is a runner. I will give her that. But her trail ends here. You are wasting your time. Am I? The man's voice turned hard. Let me tell you what I know, Hawthorne. I know you paid $2 for her. I know you brought her to this cabin, and I know she is right behind that door listening to us now. Abigail held her breath. What I do not get is why you are protecting her. She is nothing to you. Turn her over and I will be on my way. Make this hard, and it will go badly for you both. Ezra's only answer was the loud click of him cocking his rifle. I will take that as a no, Silas. Well, have it your way, then. His voice was low, tired, like a man who had seen this trouble before. But I ought to tell you, I am not alone. I have 2 men in the trees to the north, and one more down by the creek. You shoot me, they shoot you. Then they just take the woman anyway. Abigail grabbed Ezra's arm. Do not. He's telling the truth. I can feel them watching us. What do you want? Ezra yelled out. Just the woman. Hand her over and you can walk away from this. Nobody has to die today. And if I refuse, then folks start dying, and she is first. A long quiet settled between them. Abigail made up her mind. Ezra, let me go. I am not worth you dying for. He turned and looked at her, and the fight in his eyes stole her breath. You are worth everything, he said, soft but firm. Everything I have, and everything I am. You barely know me. I have known you for 3 years, ever since the night you sang me back from the edge of death. He touched her face, his hand gentle even with all the trouble brewing around them. I am not losing you again. How sweet. Silas's voice cut through the air. But I'm getting mighty cold out here. You have 1 minute to decide. After that, my men start shooting. Ezra moved to the window and raised his rifle. You fire on this cabin you had better not miss, because I do not. Brave words. Let's see if you can back 'em up. The first shot tore through the window, sending glass everywhere. It slammed into the far wall. Abigail screamed and hit the floor. Ezra fired back, the rifle so loud it shook the little room. Stay down, he yelled, already moving to the other window. More shots came, from the trees, from the creek, from all around. Ezra kept firing, the rifle kicking hard against his shoulder. Abigail! The trap door under the bed. She scrambled across the floorboards, shoved the bed aside, and found a wooden hatch. It leads to a root cellar. There's a tunnel in the back that comes out about 50 yards into the woods. I am not leaving you. You are not leaving me. You are going to survive. He grabbed her arm and pushed her toward the hatch. Find a woman named Sarah Bennington in town. She runs the boarding house. Tell her I sent you. She will help you. Now go. A bullet zipped past his head so close he could feel the heat. He fired back, and somewhere in the trees, a man screamed. Abigail dropped down into the dark, cold cellar. It smelled of dirt and old potatoes. She felt her way through the blackness until she found the tunnel. Above her, the gunfire and shouting went on. She crawled through the tight space until finally she saw a sliver of gray daylight. She pushed out into the woods, shaking and gasping for air. The shooting had stopped. She knew she should run, just disappear into the trees. But she could not. She climbed a small rise and looked back at the cabin. The sight turned her blood to ice. Ezra was on his knees in the snow. 2 men held his arms while Silas Thorne stood over him, a pistol pressed to his forehead. Last chance, Hawthorne. Where is she? Ezra spat blood onto Silas's boots. Go to hell. Wrong answer. Silas cocked the hammer. Abigail did not think. She just ran. She burst out of the trees, screaming, running right for them. Stop! I am here. Silas turned, surprise on his face. Well, well, the rabbit comes back to the trap. Let him go. He has nothing to do with this. It is me you want. True enough. Silas nodded to his men. Bring her here. They dragged Abigail forward until she stood next to Ezra. Abigail, no! Ezra's voice was broken. Why did you not run? Because I am tired of running. She looked right at him, tears freezing on her face. Because you were the first person who ever saw me as more than just property. Because, her voice cracked, I would rather die here with you than live out there without you. Silas watched them, a cold smile on his face. How romantic. Too bad I have a bounty to collect. He raised his pistol. Sorry, Hawthorne. Nothing personal. Wait. The voice came from the edge of the clearing. An older woman stood there, her hair gray, wrapped in a thick shawl. Behind her stood 2 men with rifles. Sarah Bennington, Silas said, his voice flat. This is not your concern. Everything that happens in my town is my concern. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes like flint. Let them go. I have got legal papers for her. I do not care about your papers. I care about the truth. She pointed a finger at Abigail. I know who this woman is. I know what that man did to her. And I know that killing him was the only justice she was ever going to get. That is not for you to decide. No, but it is for the sheriff to decide. And Sheriff Mallister is right behind me with a dozen men." Sarah smiled, cold and sure. "So you can leave now, or you can explain to a lawman why you are threatening folks on my property." Silas went pale. He looked at his men, then at the rifles aimed at him, then at the men coming out of the trees. "This is not over," he hissed. "Yes, it is." Sarah's voice was final. "Get out of my territory, and you tell Virgil Stone if he sends anyone else, they will not be leaving alive." Silas stared for another second, then put his pistol away and got on his horse. "You are making a mistake." "Maybe so, but it is our mistake to make." As Silas and his men rode away, Abigail fell into Ezra's arms. "It is over," she whispered. "Is it really over?" Ezra held her tight. "Not yet," he said, "but we are getting there." Sarah Bennington's boarding house became their safe place. She led them through the back ways of town, keeping them out of sight. "In here," she said, opening a door at the back of the house. "Nobody will bother you." The room was small but clean. Ezra helped Abigail onto the bed. She was shaking something fierce. "I will get some hot water and bandages," Sarah said. "That cut on your head needs looking after." Ezra touched his forehead and was surprised to find blood. "I am fine. You are bleeding on my clean floor. Sit down and stop being stubborn." Before he could say another word, she was gone. Abigail reached for his hand. "She is right. You need help. I just need you to be okay. That is all I need. I am alive because of you, and because of Sarah." Ezra sat down hard on the bed, the fight finally draining out of him. "I did not even know she was coming. How did she find out?" "I do not know, and I do not care." He looked at Abigail, really saw the fear still in her eyes. "You came back for me. You could have run. You came back for me. I could not just let him do that to you, but you nearly got yourself killed. It would have been worth it, Ezra." A knot tightened in his chest. "Do not say that. Do not ever say that again." "Why not? It is the truth." "Because your life has value, Abigail. It is worth more than mine. Not to me, it is not." Her eyes were fierce even as she trembled. "You were the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered. Like I was not just some broken thing waiting to be thrown out. You are not broken. But I have this scar. I killed a man. I was sold for $2. None of that is who you are. Then what is?" He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the scar. "This is. This scar proves you fought back. Your heart made you sing to a dying stranger. Your courage brought you back here when any sane person would have run." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known, Abigail Mercer. And if you believe a scar can change that, you are mistaken." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Ezra." The door swung open and Sarah came back in with hot water and clean bandages. "You two can save the sweet talk for later," she said plainly. "We have real work to do right now." She started cleaning Ezra's head wound with an expert touch that was firm but gentle. "That bounty hunter," Ezra said, "Silas Thorne, he will be back." "Maybe," Sarah said as she tied off the bandage. "Men like him just follow the money. When the profit is gone, so are they." "There is $500 on my head," Abigail said quietly. "That is more than enough profit." Sarah's hands froze. $500? That is a hefty sum. The Stone family has deep pockets and a long memory. "Tell me about them. Everything." So Abigail told them the story one more time. About her father's debts being sold to Garrett Stone, the 2 years of cruelty, the night she killed him, and the long hunt that followed. Sarah listened to it all, her expression hardening with every single detail. She was quiet for a long moment after Abigail finished. "I knew a woman once," Sarah said at last. "Back in Kansas. Her husband would drink and beat her terribly every Saturday night. One evening she fought back and killed him with a cast-iron skillet. They hanged her 3 weeks later. They called it murder and did not care that he had broken her bones more times than anyone knew." "What is your point?" Ezra asked. "My point is that the law does not look out for women like us. It looks out for men like Garrett Stone, men with money and power." Sarah looked straight at Abigail, her eyes blazing. "But the law is not the only kind of justice there is. Sometimes you have to make your own." "How?" "By proving the truth so loudly that no one can pretend not to hear it." "And how do we do that?" A cold, determined smile spread across Sarah's face. "We find witnesses, people who saw the real Garrett Stone and can tell a jury what a cruel man he was. If we can prove he was a monster, you can claim self-defense. His family is not the whole world. There had to be servants or neighbors who saw something." Abigail frowned in thought. "There was one woman, Eleanor Dyer. She was a servant at the ranch. She saw—" her voice hitched. "She saw some of the things he did to me." "Where is she now?" "I do not know. She left a few months after I came. I always figured she was let go for asking too many questions." "Then we will find her," Sarah declared, standing up. "If she is alive, she can speak for you. And if she does, you might just have a chance." "A chance at what?" Ezra asked. "Freedom," Sarah said. "Real freedom, not a life of running and hiding." Abigail looked at Ezra, a question in her eyes. "You think it is possible?" "I think Sarah is right. Running is not working. It is time to fight back, especially against the stones." Ezra took her hand. "You have been hunted for 3 years. It is time to stop running. We will do this. We will find Eleanor Dyer, and we will prove who Garrett Stone truly was, and we will end this for good." Abigail squeezed his hand, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Together. Together. Sarah started sending messages that very same day. She had friends and favors owed all across the territory, a hidden network of eyes and ears. She sent out the description of Eleanor Dyer, a woman in her early 30s who worked at the Stone Ranch in Missouri about 2 years ago. In just a week, they got a response. "She is in Sacramento," Sarah announced, walking in as they ate breakfast. "She is working as a seamstress and goes by her mother's name, Eleanor Tate. She's alive." Abigail's voice shook with relief. "She is really alive." "Alive and ready to talk," Sarah confirmed. "My contact said she has carried a lot of guilt about leaving you there all these years." "It was not her fault," Abigail insisted. "Garrett would have killed her if she had tried to help." "Maybe, but a guilty heart does not listen to reason." Sarah put a piece of paper down. "I have sent word that you are alive and that we need her to testify. She has agreed to come." "Just like that?" "Just like that. Some people are just waiting for a chance to do the right thing. The waiting was the hardest part. Winter got deeper, piling snow all around Pine Ridge. Ezra and Abigail spent their days together talking and learning about each other. The awkwardness between them melted away, replaced by something real." One night, sitting by the fire, Abigail asked the question that had been on her mind. "Ezra, when this is all over, what happens then?" He looked at her, the firelight in his eyes. "What do you want to happen?" "I do not know. I never thought I would have a future to plan for." "And now?" she asked, her voice low. "Now I am starting to imagine things." "Things like what?" "Like staying here, in Oregon, with you in your cabin." His heart started beating faster. "As what?" he asked, his voice careful. "A friend? A guest?" Abigail looked him right in the eye. "As whatever you will have me as." Ezra reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers brushing against her scar. "I have been alone for 5 years," he said. "I thought I would be alone forever. I thought that was what I deserved." "Why?" "Because I could not save my wife, Martha. I could not save my son." His voice cracked. "I thought God was punishing me, making me live with the guilt. That is not how it works. I know that now, because of you. He held her face in his hands. You showed me that surviving is not a punishment, Abigail. It is a gift, a chance to find something worth living for. And have you? Have you found something worth living for? I am looking at her. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Ezra, I love you. The words felt rough but true. I do not know when it began. Maybe it was in that cave 3 years ago, or maybe it was the first time I heard your voice at that auction. But I know it is true. I love you, Abigail Mercer. With your scars and your secrets, all of it. Tears were streaming down her face now. You cannot love me. You do not know everything. I know enough, he said. I know you are brave and kind. I know you have walked through hell and are still standing. And I know that being with you makes me feel truly alive for the first time in a very long time. He pulled her closer to him. What else could I possibly need to know? She could not speak. The feelings were too big for words. So, she kissed him. It was gentle at first, a question between two broken people finding their way. Then it grew into a fierce and certain promise. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, I love you too. I did not think I could ever love anyone again, but I do. I love you. Ezra held her tight, feeling her heart beat against his. Then we fight, he said. We fight for this, for us, for the future we both deserve. What if we lose? We will not. But what if we do? His voice was full of certainty. Because I am not losing you. Not again. Not ever. Eleanor Dyer arrived on a cold February morning. She was thinner and older than Abigail remembered, with streaks of gray in her hair. But the moment she saw Abigail, she began to cry. Oh, dear Lord, you are alive! Eleanor rushed over and pulled Abigail into a tight hug. I was so sure that he had killed you. He tried, Abigail said, hugging her back as they both cried. But I killed him first. Eleanor pulled away, her hands on Abigail's shoulders. Good, I am glad. He deserved far worse. You do not hate me? Hate you? Child, I have prayed for this day. Prayed that someone would finally stop that monster. They all sat together in Sarah's parlor, and Eleanor began to tell her story. I worked at the Stone Ranch for 3 years, she said. Started when Garrett was still just a boy pretending to be a gentleman, but I saw the cruelty in him even then. What about his father? Ezra asked. Virgil Stone is worse. Where do you think the boy learned it? Eleanor's voice was like stone. Virgil is just smarter about it. He keeps his evil behind closed doors while Garrett was always leaving proof. You saw what he did to Abigail. I saw enough. Eleanor looked at Abigail, her own eyes full of regret. I should have done something sooner, but I was afraid. Virgil has the whole county in his pocket. I thought if I spoke out, they would just make me disappear. So why did you leave? Because I could not stand to watch it anymore. I could not listen to the screams and pretend I did not hear them. Tears streamed down her face. I told myself I would get help, but I was just a coward. You are here now, Abigail said softly. But is that enough? Eleanor's voice was filled with desperation. I will testify. I will tell them everything I saw. The beatings, the awful marks on her skin, the way he spoke of her like some kind of animal. But who is going to believe me? They will have to. Sarah's tone was pure iron. Because you are not the only one fixing to talk. I have been doing some digging. Turns out Garrett Stone left a long trail of ruined women behind him. Servant girls who just disappeared. A school teacher who drowned herself in a river. We have found at least 6, and I reckon there are more. Predators like him do not just stop. They just get better at hiding. So we gather every story, every witness we can find. Then we take it to someone who cannot be bought by the Stone family. And if that does not work, Sarah said with a grim smile, we will make so much noise they cannot possibly ignore us. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah's friends worked day and night, tracking down other women and building a case. Some were too scared to speak up. But enough came forward to paint a clear picture of the monster Garrett Stone truly was. Eleanor wrote down her testimony, pages filled with everything she had seen and heard. "This is it," she said, handing the papers to Sarah. "This is everything I know." Sarah read it, her face growing darker with every word. "This is powerful," she said. "If we can get this to the right people." Just then a sharp knock came at the door. Everyone froze. "Who is it?" Sarah called out. "It is Sheriff Mallister. I need a word with you." Trouble came knocking right at Sarah's door. A tall, weathered man with a silver star pinned to his chest stood there, 2 deputies right behind him. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Bennington, I'm here on official business." "What kind of business?" "I need to take Miss Abigail Mercer into custody." Before the words were even out, Ezra was on his feet, standing between Abigail and the law. "On what grounds?" The sheriff's answer landed like a stone. "Murder. There is a warrant for her signed by a federal judge." "That warrant is built on lies," Ezra shot back. The sheriff's eyes were tired but firm. "Maybe so, son. But it is still legal. I have to enforce it, or the next man with this badge might not be so decent about it. I am not handing her to the Stones. I am holding her for a proper hearing. The law may be bent, but it is the law." Abigail placed a calming hand on Ezra's arm. "It is all right." "No, it is not. I will not let them take you." "If you fight this," she said, her voice steady, "they will just arrest you too, or worse." Her eyes met his, calm on the surface. "This is not over, Ezra. We have Eleanor's testimony and the evidence. We just need a little time." She turned to the lawman. "Sheriff, I will go with you. But I want your word I will be safe and get a fair hearing." Sheriff Mallister gave a slow nod. "You will have both. You have my word." Ezra grabbed her arm. "I am going with you." "You cannot." "I am going," he said, his voice quiet but solid as an oak tree. "I am not leaving you." The sheriff looked from one to the other, sizing them up. "All right," he said at last. "But you play by my rules. No trouble. We do this the right way." They stepped out into the biting February air. As they walked toward the jail, a voice cut through the quiet street. "Well, now, look at that. The murderer is giving up." The words sent a chill down Abigail's spine. A man stood on the edge of a growing crowd, a nasty grin on his face. Model. A tall, thin man in a fine black coat stood at the edge of the crowd. His eyes were as cold as winter ice. "Virgil Stone, father." Abigail whispered his name like it was poison. "Do not you dare call me that," Virgil sneered. "My son treated you like family, and you killed him in cold blood. Your son was a monster. My son was a saint next to you." Virgil's smile was like a razor. "But you will get your chance to tell your lies in court. Not that it will matter. I have a judge who owes me, a jury I picked myself, and witnesses who will say whatever I tell them to. That is not the truth. The truth, little girl, is whatever I say it is." He looked at Ezra with pure disgust. "And you, lumberjack, should have stayed in the woods. Now you will go down right alongside her. Between them. That is enough, Mr. Stone. This woman is in my custody." "Of course, Sheriff." Virgil's smile never left his face. He turned and vanished back into the crowd. Abigail watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. He is going to rig the whole thing, the trial, the verdict, everything. He wants to see me hang. No, he is not. Ezra took her face in his hands. "You heard him. I heard a coward who thinks his money can buy him the world. He is wrong. We have the truth on our side. We have Eleanor, and we have something he does not have. What is that? We have each other. We are not giving up. We are going to fight this, Abigail, and we are going to win. How can you be so sure? Because I have to be. Losing you is not an option." The sheriff cleared his throat. "It is time to go." They walked toward the jail, hand in hand, heads held high. From her doorway, Sarah Bennington watched them go. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "get your testimony and find the others." "What are you going to do?" Sarah's eyes were set like stone. "I am going to make some noise." The jail cell was small, with just a narrow cot and a barred window. Ezra refused to leave her side. He sat in a chair just outside her cell, close enough to talk but too far to touch. "You ought to go," Abigail told him on the second night. "Get some rest. I am fine right here. You look awful." "So do you," he said with a half-smile. Sarah sent word. "The hearing is set for 3 days. That is way too fast. Virgil Stone wants a quick verdict because he is scared. The more time we have, the more truth we can uncover, and we are not going to let him rush this." Ezra spoke low and serious. "Eleanor's been working non-stop. She found 2 other women who will speak. They were maids at the Stone Ranch before you got there. Will anyone believe them? They will be heard. That is a start." Abigail shut her eyes, feeling a wave of pure exhaustion. What if it is not enough? What if Virgil has paid off every person who matters? Then we appeal and we keep on fighting. We do not stop. Until what? Until they hang me. Until they put you in jail for helping me. Her voice trembled. "Ezra, I cannot let you ruin your life over me. Too late for that." His voice was quiet but full of fire. "My life was already ruined. For 5 years there was nothing but regret. Then you came along and gave me a reason to live. I am not letting that go. Not for Virgil Stone, not for anybody. What if I am not worth all this? You are worth everything." He reached a hand through the bars and she grabbed it, holding on with all her might. Everything. The morning of the hearing was gray and cold. Sheriff Mallister came for Abigail before sunrise, walking her to the courthouse as the town slowly came to life. A small crowd was already waiting. Some were just curious folks, some were Stone's hired men, and a few were women who gave Abigail a quiet nod of support. The courthouse was filled to the brim. People packed the seats, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hall. Virgil Stone sat right up front, his face a perfect mask of a grieving father. His lawyer, a skinny man with cold eyes, arranged his papers like he had already won. Abigail was guided to a chair at the front. Ezra sat right behind her. His presence was a steady warmth at her back. Judge Harrison, a large man with a graying beard, took his seat. His eyes revealed nothing. He banged his gavel one time and the room went quiet. "This hearing is to decide if there is enough evidence for a murder trial against Abigail Rose Mercer for the death of Garrett Stone." His voice was flat. "The prosecution may begin." Virgil's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket smoothly. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. On the night of August 12th, 1870, Abigail Mercer murdered Garrett Stone in his own home. She stabbed him 17 times with a knife from the kitchen, and then ran. Whispers spread through the room. The defendant was Mr. Stone's ward. His family took her in out of charity. And for their kindness, she repaid them with this terrible violence. Objection. Sarah Bennington stood up, her voice sharp and clear. "I am representing the defendant, and I would like to point out that the prosecution is stating his opinion as if it were fact." The judge lifted an eyebrow. "Mrs. Bennington, I was not aware you were a lawyer. I do not need to be a lawyer to know when a man is telling tall tales, Your Honor." A few people in the crowd laughed. Virgil's expression grew dark. "Please make your objections properly, Mrs. Bennington. Sit down." Sarah sat, but she had made her point. Now people were listening closely. The prosecution brought up one witness after another. A deputy testified about finding Garrett's body. A doctor described the wounds in awful detail. A neighbor swore she heard Abigail threaten Garrett just days before he died. "She said she'd kill him," the woman declared. "She said she would make him pay for what he had done." "And how did you take that statement?" Virgil's lawyer asked. "I took it to mean she was planning to murder him." Sarah stood up again. "Did you hear her say those exact words, that she would kill him?" The woman paused. "Well, no, not in those exact words." "Then what exactly did she say?" The pause was longer this time. She said she wished he would die. Wishing someone was dead is not the same as planning a murder, Your Honor. The judge's face was still a blank slate. Noted. Continue. The prosecution's story took all morning to tell. By the end, Abigail felt sick to her stomach. They had painted her as a cold-blooded killer. They said nothing about what Garrett had done to her, not a word about the abuse or the scars he left behind. At last, Sarah rose. The defense calls Eleanor Dyer to the stand. A murmur went through the crowd as Eleanor walked to the front. She seemed smaller now with all those eyes on her, but when she sat down, her voice was strong. Please state your name and your previous job. My name is Eleanor Dyer. I was a servant at the Stone Ranch from 1867 to 1869. During that time, did you witness the relationship between Garrett Stone and Abigail Mercer? I did. And what did you see? Eleanor took a deep breath. Her words came out clear and steady. I saw Garrett Stone beat that young lady almost every single day. I saw him lock her in her room for weeks. I saw him. Her voice shook. I saw him do things to her that no person should ever have to suffer. The courtroom fell completely silent. What kinds of things? Sarah asked softly. He hurt her in every way a man can hurt a woman, and he liked it. You could see the pleasure in his eyes when she was in pain. Did you ever tell anyone about this abuse? No. Eleanor's voice finally broke. I was too scared. Virgil Stone is a powerful man. I knew nobody would take my word over his. But you are here today. I am here now because I cannot live with the silence anymore. That girl, she said, pointing at Abigail, that girl was tormented for 2 years. And when she finally stood up for herself, they called her a murderer. Tears ran down Eleanor's cheeks. She is not a killer. She is a survivor. Virgil's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is all just hearsay and emotional nonsense. It is not hearsay. I saw it myself. Eleanor stood, shaking with anger. I saw the bruises. I heard her screams. I watched that monster tear a young woman apart, piece by piece, and I did nothing. Sit down, Mrs. Dyer. I will not sit down. Not until everyone here knows the truth about that man. Judge Harrison banged his gavel hard. Order. Order in this court. But Eleanor was not done. You want to know who Garrett Stone was? Ask the women he hurt. That is enough. Virgil Stone stood up, his face turning a deep red. This woman is a liar. She should be arrested for these filthy stories. And there you have it, Sarah's voice cut through the noise. The true nature of the Stone family. Not a grieving father, but a bully trying to silence anyone who speaks the truth. The room exploded into shouting. The judge banged his gavel and the sheriff tried to get control. Through it all, Abigail just sat there, frozen. Then she felt Ezra's hand on her shoulder, solid and warm. Just breathe, he whispered. This is not over yet. When things finally settled down, Judge Harrison looked even more worn out. Mrs. Bennington, do you have any other witnesses? I do, Your Honor, several. Sarah held up a stack of papers. I have statements from 6 other women who suffered the same kind of abuse from Garrett Stone. I have doctors' records that describe injuries that match the defendant's story. And I have one more witness I believe this court needs to hear from. And who might that be? Dr. James Whitfield of Pine Ridge. An older man stood up and walked to the front. His shoulders were stooped, like a man who has seen too much of the world's troubles. Dr. Whitfield, Sarah began, how long have you been a doctor in this territory? 30 years, ma'am. And in that time, did you ever treat Garrett Stone? I did on many occasions. For what reason? The doctor looked over at Virgil Stone, then he stood a little straighter. For injuries a man gets in a fight, broken knuckles, deep scratches on his face and arms. The kind of injuries a man gets when he is hitting someone who is fighting back. Objection, Virgil's lawyer yelled. That is just his opinion, is it? Sarah asked the doctor. In your medical opinion, Dr. Whitfield, were Garrett Stone's injuries the kind you would see in a case of domestic abuse? Yes, they were. And did you ever report what you suspected? The doctor's face filled with shame. No, I did not. The stones are too powerful. I was afraid of them. But you are speaking now. I am speaking now because a young woman's life is on the line. Because I have been quiet for far too long. His voice cracked. Because some things are more important than being afraid. The courtroom was completely silent. Is there anything else, Mrs. Bennington? Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Abigail Mercer to the stand. Abigail's heart nearly stopped. She was not prepared for this. But Sarah looked at her, her eyes calm and strong. Tell them, Sarah mouthed. Tell them everything. Abigail walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they might give out. She sat down, her hands clenched together in her lap. Miss Mercer, Sarah began, her voice gentle. Can you please tell the court in your own words what happened on the night of August 12th, 1870? Abigail took a deep breath. I was 18 years old when my father sold me to Garrett Stone. He had gambling debts, and Garrett offered him $200. My father sold me. He took the money and left me at the Stone Ranch. I never laid eyes on him again. Garrett Stone made it clear right away that I belonged to him, that I was his property. At first, he acted decent. He gave me nice clothes and good meals, making me hope things would be all right. That all changed the first time I told him no. He wanted things from me that a woman should not have to give. When I refused, he hit me. He said I did not have the right to say no. I tried to run 3 times. The first time, he beat me so badly I could not walk for a week. The second time, he gave me this scar, saying it was a mark so everyone knew who I belonged to. The third time, he promised he would kill me if I tried again. And I believed him. Then came August 12th. Abigail's eyes closed, the memories flooding back. He came home mean drunk, worse than I had ever seen him. He had a knife and he was saying terrible things. He said he was going to make sure I could never have children, that I would be useless to any other man. And so, I fought back. I was terrified, but somehow I got the knife away from him. Then, her voice broke. I just started stabbing. I could not stop. I was so scared he would get back up and finish what he started. When asked how many times, I told them I did not know. I lost count. When it was finally over, he was dead. And I ran. I just ran and did not look back for 6 months. When Sarah asked if I regretted what I did, I looked at everyone in that room. I regret I had to do it. I regret a man is dead. But I do not regret surviving. I will never apologize for fighting to live. The courtroom was dead silent. Then one person started clapping. Then another, until half the room was on its feet. Virgil Stone was yelling for order, but it was no use. The tide had turned. When things finally quieted down, Judge Harrison said he had heard enough. He adjourned the court until the morning, when he would deliver his verdict. That night I sat in my cell, holding Ezra's hand through the bars. He told me I was incredible, that I was brave for telling my story. I told him I was just terrified. He said courage is not about being fearless, it is about acting anyway. He believed the judge saw a survivor, not a killer. He promised we would keep fighting no matter what. Suddenly we heard a ruckus outside. Sheriff Mallister came and got us. Virgil Stone was out front with a dozen armed men. He shouted that he was there to post my bail and take me into his own custody. Ezra stepped up, ready for a fight, but Virgil just sneered, saying what he was doing was perfectly legal. He claimed that as the victim's family, he had the right to take custody of me until a trial. He told the sheriff to hand me over or lose his job. The sheriff was caught in a bind. Just then, Sarah Bennington pushed through the crowd holding a piece of paper. It was a telegram from the federal marshal. She announced that due to concerns about corruption, the federal government was taking over my case. Virgil's smile vanished. Sarah shoved the paper at him and said I was now under federal protection and he could not touch me. Virgil's face turned purple with rage as he snarled that it was not over. Sarah just said that for tonight, it was done. Sarah told me to come with her, that she would get me somewhere safe. I looked at Ezra, and he nodded. As we walked out into the night, Virgil Stone just stood there shaking with anger. But for the first time since Garrett's death, I was not afraid of him. I felt hope. 3 days later, Federal Marshal William Cole arrived. He was a tall, serious man who looked like he had seen it all. He rode into town with 2 deputies and an air of authority. He came right to Sarah's boarding house and introduced himself. He said he was on my case but told me not to thank him until after we had won. He said he had read my testimony, but he wanted to hear everything from me again, so for the 4th time I told the whole terrible story. He listened without a word, his face like stone. When I finished, he was quiet for a long while. He finally said the hardest part of his job was watching good people suffer while men like Virgil Stone thrive. He admitted the system usually protects rich men. I asked why he bothered. He said because every now and then, someone like me comes along who refuses to back down. He gave a faint smile and said that having so many good people fighting for me told him everything he needed to know about who I was. So what's next? We build a case so airtight that all his money can't buy him out of it. I've got deputies in Missouri right now gathering more proof. We have statements from 6 other women. Garrett Stone hurt just like you. We have medical records and testimony from the staff. And we have your story. It might just be enough. But one thing would seal this deal for good. Cole leaned in close. Garrett Stone's journal. Abigail felt the color drain from her face. His what? Eleanor Dyer told me Garrett kept a detailed journal, hidden somewhere in that ranch house. If we find it, and it says what I reckon it does, it'll prove everything. You're talking about breaking into the Stone Ranch. Cole gave a slight smile. I'm talking about collecting evidence for a federal investigation. The law can be a little flexible. Abigail looked at Ezra. If we're caught, we're in deep trouble. But if we don't try, Virgil walks free, and you'll be watching your back for the rest of your days. It wasn't really a choice. When are we going? Abigail asked. A nod of approval from Cole. Tonight. They rode under a dark sky, 4 ghosts moving through the Oregon woods. Eleanor knew the way. There's a servant's door on the east side, she whispered. It goes to a storeroom. From there we can get right to Garrett's study. What about guards? Virgil keeps 2 men, but they're more interested in their bottle than their job. And the journal? It's in a hidden spot in Garrett's desk. 3rd drawer on the left has a false bottom. Cole nodded. Ezra, you're with me. Eleanor, you and Abigail stay here with the horses. If things go south, you ride for town and don't stop. I'm going with you, Abigail said, her voice firm. This is my fight. I'm not going to sit by while you all take the risk. Cole looked at her for a long moment, then gave a sharp nod. Fine. But you do exactly as I say. No arguments. They left Eleanor and crept toward the dark ranch house. The servant's door was unlocked, just like Eleanor said. Inside, Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the place she'd spent 2 years in hell, the place she'd killed a man to save herself. Ezra's hand found hers, a warm and steady comfort in the dark. I'm here, he whispered. They found the study easily. The big desk stood in the middle of the room like a monument. Cole went straight to the 3rd drawer on the left. He felt around the bottom until he heard a soft click. A hidden space popped open. Inside was a leather book full of tight script. Cole flipped through it, his face getting darker with every page. Dear Lord, he muttered, this is worse than I imagined. Ezra's voice was a sharp whisper. Someone's coming. Then they all heard it. Heavy footsteps headed their way. Cole shoved the journal in his coat and pulled his pistol just as the door flew open. Virgil Stone stood there holding a rifle with pure murder in his eyes. Did you really think I wouldn't be watching? He said, his voice cold as a winter creek. Did you think you could sneak in here like common thieves? Put the rifle down, Stone, Cole said steady. This is a federal investigation. Virgil laughed. This ain't no investigation, it's trespassing. He raised the rifle. Ezra moved like a flash, shoving Abigail out of the way as the gun roared. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around before he fell. Ezra! Abigail screamed. Cole fired back, the bullet blasting a lamp to pieces. As Virgil ducked for cover, Abigail scrambled to Ezra's side, pressing her hands to the wound. Stay with me, please. I'm all right, Abby, he grunted. His eyes clear despite the pain. Just a scratch. More shots echoed in the house. Then a new voice cut through the noise. "Father! Stop!" Everyone froze. A young man stood behind Virgil in the hall. He had his father's eyes, but his face was filled with horror. "Thomas," Virgil said, lowering his rifle a bit. "What are you doing here?" "I came to stop you," Thomas said, stepping forward. "I know what you've been doing. I know about Garrett and the women. I know everything. My brother was a good man." Thomas's voice broke with fury. "My brother was a monster. I've read his journal, Father. I saw the names, the things he wrote about what he did to them. He was evil, and you protected him." Virgil's face turned to ash. "It doesn't matter how I found it," Thomas said, turning to Cole. "Marshal, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I know. Just please, make this stop." In the dead silence, Virgil Stone just seemed to collapse. He dropped his rifle, his shoulders slumped, and he looked like a broken old man. "I knew," he whispered. "God help me. I always knew." "Then why?" Abigail demanded. "Why did you hunt me down?" Virgil looked at her with hollow eyes. "Because he was my son." The trial was held 3 weeks later in Portland, far from the Stone family's influence. The courtroom was packed. Garrett Stone's journal was laid out as evidence. One by one, people took the stand. Eleanor Dyer, the doctor, and the women who had survived Garrett's cruelty. Then Thomas Stone testified against his own father, tears running down his face. "I loved my brother," he said, "but I can't ignore the truth." When it was Abigail's turn, she told her story one last time. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was speaking for all the women Garrett had silenced. "I killed Garrett Stone," she said, her voice ringing clear through the courtroom. "I stabbed him 17 times, and I'd do it again, not because I wanted to kill, but because I wanted to live, because every woman has the right to defend herself from a monster." The room was still as a tomb. Then one person stood up, then another. Soon the whole courtroom was on its feet, a silent show of support. The jury was out for less than an hour. The verdict came back like a thunderclap. Not guilty. Abigail was finally free. I collapsed into Ezra's arms, sobbing with the release of 3 years of terror. "It is over," I whispered. "It is really over." He held me tight and said, "You are free." Virgil Stone was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes. The Stone Ranch was seized and sold, with the money going to Garrett's other victims. And I, Abigail Rose Mercer, was finally done running. Spring arrived in Oregon like a fresh start. The snow melted, and the world came alive again. Ezra's cabin felt warmer, more like a real home. I stood in the doorway watching him chop wood, his shoulder all healed up. "You are staring," he called out. I told him I had been for 10 minutes. I walked toward him on the soft ground. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now," I told him. "How different I am." He put down the axe. He asked me how I was different. I explained that for years, I woke up afraid every single morning, afraid of what the day might bring. But that morning I woke up, and for the first time in so long, I was not afraid. Ezra pulled me into a warm embrace. He said that feeling was freedom. I told him that is what it feels like when I'm with you. I looked up at this man who had saved my life for $2 and given me so much more. I took a breath and said I wanted to stay forever, as his wife, if he would have me. Ezra went completely still. I told him he did not have to answer right away, that I knew it was all so sudden. My entire life has been a field of doubt. But I am absolutely sure about this. I am sure about you. He stood there silent, and for one terrible sinking moment, she thought she had made a colossal mistake. She figured she had read every sign wrong. Then he closed the distance and kissed her. It was nothing like their first kiss, which was born from fear and frantic relief. This one was deeper, a slow and steady promise of forever. When they finally parted for air, Ezra touched his forehead to hers. "Well, I was planning to ask you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I even have the ring tonight." Ordered it from Portland 2 weeks ago. You did? I sure did, he chuckled, a sound full of rough joy. You just beat me to the punch. Is that a yes? That is a yes, Ezra. It is the biggest yes of my entire life. She laughed then, a true sound that came from a place she thought Garrett Stone had destroyed for good. But he had not won. Nothing could touch this, nothing could break them. They were married in Sarah Bennington's parlor on a warm afternoon in May, with Eleanor Dyer as her maid of honor. Sheriff Mallister was the one to give Abigail away. It seemed like half the town showed up to watch, and the other half sent along presents. Abigail wore a plain white dress that Sarah had helped her make. In her hair she had woven wildflowers, the same kind that grew wild around Ezra's cabin. And draped over her shoulders was the burlap sack, transformed so much you could hardly recognize it. Sarah had helped with that too. She had cut the coarse fabric into a delicate shawl and embroidered it with tiny flowers until it was a thing of beauty. It held her past without defining her future. You look perfect, Ezra told her when he saw her. I look like a woman who's been through hell, she replied. You look like a woman who walked right out the other side, he said. The ceremony was short and simple. They promised their lives, they exchanged rings, and they shared a kiss that made the whole crowd cheer. And when it was all done, Ezra lifted Abigail into his arms and carried her from the boarding house to the wagon waiting outside. Where are we going? She asked, laughing. Home, he answered. The word had never sounded sweeter. 5 years went by in a hurry. The little cabin grew, adding one room, then another. A proper barn and a chicken coop came next, along with a garden that Abigail tended with a loving hand. Then came the children. First, a daughter named Rose, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. Then came a son, Jacob, with all of Ezra's strength and Abigail's fiery spirit. The lumber business was a success. Ezra hired men to help him, building a good business that provided for his family and gave work to a half-dozen men from town. Abigail started a school. It began small, with just a few children from nearby farms learning their letters in her kitchen. But the word got around, and soon Ezra and his men built her a real schoolhouse. You are changing this place, Sarah told her one afternoon as she watched the children pour out of the school. I'm just teaching them to read. You are giving them hope, Sarah insisted. You are showing them the world can be better. That is much more than teaching. Abigail thought about that on her walk home that evening. Hope. It was such a small word for such a big thing. She had lived so long without it, she had almost forgotten its feel. For years she had been made to believe her life was worth nothing. But she was not nothing. She was a wife, she was a mother, she was a teacher and a survivor. Her life was proof that even the darkest night has to give way to the dawn. 20 years passed. Rose grew into a fine young woman and went back east to study medicine. Jacob took over the lumber business, growing it into the biggest in the territory. The schoolhouse became a full academy, teaching children from all over Oregon. And through it all, Abigail and Ezra grew old together. It was not always a peaceful life. There were tough winters and lean years, sickness and sorrow, the 1,000 little battles that make up a life. But there was also joy, a deep and steady joy that came from being loved. It came from building something that mattered, and from knowing the person beside you would be there right until the end. On their 20th anniversary, they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Do you ever think about it? Abigail asked him. The auction? Sometimes. Do you? He replied. Sometimes, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I think about how different my life would have been if you had not stepped forward. If you had just stayed in the crowd like everyone else. I could not do that, Abby. You know that. I know, she said, but I still think about it. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, then he said, I think about the cave, the one where you saved my life. That was 23 years ago now. He took her hand, tracing the lines on her palm. I was ready to die, Abby. I wanted to. The pain was just too much, and I saw no reason to keep on fighting. But then I heard your voice. and everything changed. "I was just singing," she said softly. "You were doing more than that. You were giving me a reason to live." He lifted her hand and kissed it. "That is what you have always done. You give people a reason to live." Abigail felt tears welling in her eyes. "Ezra," she whispered. "I am telling you the truth," he said, his voice low and steady. "Look at this life you have built, the school, our family. You have touched more people than you will ever know, all because you refused to be broken." He felt her kiss, as soft and sweet as 20 years of devotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me. When all the others saw was damaged goods, you saw a person who was worth something. I did not save you, Abby. You did that all on your own. I just held the door for you." "Well then, thank you for that," she said. They sat quietly together as the first stars appeared. Two souls who had found one another against every single odd. Behind them, their house was a beacon of warmth. Inside, the laughter of their grandchildren drifted out through the open windows. What they held there in their joined hands was a precious thing. It had survived fear and pain and had been forged in the deepest darkness to become stronger than steel. It was real love, the kind that lasts. Abigail Rose Hawthorne lived for another 15 years. When she passed on in her sleep at the age of 72, it seemed like half the folks in the county came to pay their respects. They were former students, old friends, and the children of women she had helped along the way. They spoke of her courage and her kindness, and how she never let her past decide her future. They said that she was living proof that no matter how broken you feel, there is always a path toward hope. Ezra followed her 6 months later. People said he died from a broken heart, and that might be the truth of it. But he also passed on knowing his life had been full. That lonely man who once wanted to give up had become a husband and a father, a man who mattered. They buried them side by side on a small hill that overlooked the valley they called home for 40 years. Their headstone reads, Ezra Nathaniel Hawthorne, 1834 to 1912, and Abigail Rose Hawthorne, 1848 to 1920. They found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. Every year on the day they were married, the people of Pine Ridge still gather at that grave. They bring flowers and tell stories, sharing memories and thanks. And they remember the lesson that Abigail and Ezra taught them all, that love is a stronger force than hate, and hope is more powerful than despair, that a person's spirit, no matter how beat down, can always find a way to rise. It all started with $2. That was the price Ezra paid for Abigail at that auction in Pine Ridge. $2 for a woman that nobody wanted, a woman they hid behind a burlap sack. The world had written her off as a lost cause, but those $2 bought her a chance at freedom. They gave her a future, and they proved that a person's life has a value you can never put a price on. Everyone matters, and true love is not measured in money. It is measured in small moments, in brave choices, and in the courage to see the real person behind all the scars. In the end, that is all any of us can truly hope for. Someone who sees us, someone who chooses us, and someone who will never let us go. Abigail found that in Ezra, and he found it in her. And together, they showed the world that even the most broken stories can have the most beautiful endings. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.